Bombings at the Boston Marathon, school shootings everywhere, shootings in theaters. Have these events created a need for more gun legislation? President Obama says that the failure of the 2013 weapons ban was a pretty shameful day in Washington. He also says that 90% of Americans wanted that bill to pass. Did you want that bill to pass? Do you know what was in that bill? Are you aware of how your rights have been affected since the passing of the Patriot Act? Do you know what's in that bill and that act? What's going on with our government? And is every crisis a call for more restrictions on our freedoms? That's the subject today. I'm Attorney James W. Davis, and this is It's the Law Weekend Edition. Hey, Crystal, Fernando, you guys ready for this one again?
Hi.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, we think so.
We're kind of back talking about gun control because I know we've done we've talked about it a couple of times in different shows, but because of the passing of this bill, we want to talk a little bit about what was actually in the bill. A lot of people, the president is talking about why it didn't pass, sort of saying it's an assault on the U.S. and the people who wanted it. Let's talk a little bit about what's in it. Do you know what's in it, Fernando?
Well, I've been reading it this morning, and I was surprised because the kind of control they want is the control of the kind of weapons that they want. I thought it was going to be more of the kind of places you have to take them, or you're able to take them, or some other things, but it's basically just the kind of
Now, the
weapons.
propaganda going out from the White House and other places is this is just about closing a loophole so people can't buy guns without any kind of background checks at gun shows. But that has very little to do with what's in the bill. It may be a small part of the bill, but the majority of the bill is not about that. It's about, we've talked about before, on assault weapons and what they are. Did you notice the difference between the assault weapons in this bill that we're attempting to pass and the prior ones that we've discussed?
I actually don't. I mean, it's basically they're banning every kind of automatic weapons. That's basically what I got from it.
Okay, well they're classifying assault weapons, and we've talked about before how the assault weapons is such a misnomer because it's what the weapon is shaped like. It's what kind of handle it may have, what kind of grip it may have, what kind of scope it may have. They have different things. It doesn't change the number necessarily of the magazine that is going to be shot from it. Semi-automatic weapons that have, it used to be 2 features of an assault weapon. This bill tried to reduce that to only need 1 feature. If you had 1 feature of the assault weapon, then therefore it was an assault weapon. But the capability of the weapon is exactly the same as another weapon. It's absolutely no difference. It's just a matter of what it sort of looks like and that type of thing. So I think a lot of people don't realize that, and some people have guns just because of the way they look. They're not any more powerful. It's also had very little to do with the shootings in the school. One of the statements that were on this weapons ban, and you were the one that pointed it out to me, and you liked it. You want to read that for us right there?
Yeah.
For me, it didn't sound that bad when you read it, but tell me what you thought about it.
It did sound bad to me. It says, mass shootings in Newton, Aurora, and Tucson has demonstrated all too clearly the need to regulate military-style assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. These weapons allowed a gunman to fire a large number of rounds quickly and without having to reload. To me, it sounds weird. It seems like if they're getting all these events just to be able to ban what they want to ban.
Yeah, well, the thing that I noticed about it when we were reading is mass shootings in those different places have demonstrated all too clearly the need to regulate military-style assault weapons. I mean, the statement could be just as easily made, have demonstrated all too clearly that we shouldn't have places that are restricted from firearms, because these places almost unanimously have been places where firearms were restricted. So nothing is all too clearly in this. That's one of the things that I noticed about it. You noticed that, I know that you are a little more in favor sometimes of the controlling of the guns, but what is it that you would like to see controlled?
Well, I think the control should be more on how you are able to carry those guns and where you are able to carry those guns more than the kind of weapons that you are able to carry. Because, I mean, basically the right that you guys have to carry weapons with you or to have weapons with you is based on a military issues. It's based on a militia. So I don't get the point of banning certain kind of weapons instead of certain kind of places where you can use them.
You'd like to see there be that somebody's come in the office, for example, with a gun on their hip. That made you a little uncomfortable.
That do make me a little bit uncomfortable.
Okay, so those are the kind of things that you may like some sort of control on where you would be presented which would actually create the same problem as the theaters and the schools where these were zones where you couldn't carry a firearm. So if in other people's opinion, it may be that we would prefer that somebody be able to have a firearm so that somebody walking in with a rifle would know at least one person could have a firearm. A woman have it in her purse, a guy on his hip, a guy under his jacket. You know, some people would like to know that somebody might have that. That would deter people. What do you think about that, Crystal?
I don't know if that would necessarily help, but I do know that it makes me a little bit uncomfortable too when I'm at work, you know, people walking around with a gun on their hip. I think because we're in the South, though, that people can get away with it here. If you were doing that up north or something, I don't think it would.
Well, there's some places up north and other places, you know, not necessarily just up north, but there's certain places that do restrict that. You know, those are the type places we're talking about. You wouldn't walk into the school, for example, with a gun on your hip. And those what they're considered safe zones. But the safe zones have been the places that have been targeted most often. One of the things, well, you were mentioning again, we've talked about before, is that the Constitution, the guarantee of the right to bear arms, is because of the need to form a militia, in case so that we're not controlled by a government like Cuba, Germany, other places that have been controlled by a government that come in and the people were unable to defend themselves against their own government. And that is one of the main reasons that the Constitution guarantees us that freedom. So some people, although we believe, like you, I would tend to agree that the natural thought would be that we need to probably not let people have such extreme weapons. But on the same token, if we're trying to defend ourselves against a threat or a governmental action, we are going to need something like that, and that's exactly what the government would like to restrict us from. The other thing that a lot of people seem to agree on, both the Republicans and Democrats, not that I think they're that different in Congress anyway, but one of the things they seem to agree on is to deprive people of mental conditions, deprive people who have mental conditions. What do you think about that right off the bat, Crystal?
I mean, I think that's something we talked about before, you know, that if it's a pre-existing condition, something that you have, that you shouldn't be allowed to carry a weapon. I mean, sure, but these people are still getting weapons they're not stable. They're sick people, you know. Even with the Boston bombing, those guys, that's not good normal behavior, you know. Those guys are sick, and that is something that's not being prevented clearly.
Well, I think a lot of Americans share that sentiment. My first reaction to that, my first natural reaction was, yeah, if somebody's schizophrenic, if somebody has, you know, some sort of, you know, bizarre mental conflict, that they may not need to have a gun. But Fernando, actually, my gun enthusiast over here, has actually brought to me some concerns about that. Tell me what those are.
For me, the main problem in this was who is the one in charge of declaring you sane or insane mentally? Because if it's a government, the government can easily make certain groups of people just declared to be insane, and then they don't have the right to have a weapon, which would be a way to control the people that could be against the government.
Exactly. And I think that's a very valid concern. We have, whether it's a doctor, the doctors are generally going to be, things are going to be handed down through a bureaucracy, and they're going to decide how people are declared insane. And a lot of people think exactly like what you just described, that somebody who would go out and kill somebody and do these mass murders must have some mental block. And therefore, if people are inclined to do this, there might be a mental block. There might be a whole list of things of what they would determine would create. And it could be a looser and looser and looser standard where more and more people were just being declared insane, anybody who thought against the government and against the purposes of the government. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that in 30 seconds. It's easy to make the mistake of driving after you've had too much to drink. The consequences for this error can be devastating. You may lose your license even before you've gone to court if you do not take action within 10 days of your arrest. Your privilege to drive, insurance rates, and court costs can all be very expensive. I'm attorney James W. Davis. DUI crosses a large section of society. However, don't take it lightly. Contact my office and let us help you put it all in perspective. I'm attorney James W. Davis, and this is It's the Law Weekend Edition, where we're talking about the gun control and the bill that didn't pass, and we're going to get into some Patriot Act issues and how we're sort of losing our freedoms here in the United States every time there's a crisis going on in the media. So we were talking about people with mental disabilities and the concern about what the government may be doing, and doctors, I guess. I mean, part of the bill said that a doctor declared a certain person a danger or a certain type of illness, and that would be enough in some measures and some people's belief to make somebody ineligible for a gun. And there actually that's a portion of what Georgia's law is restrictive. But we're talking more about federal laws and what we're allowed to do. Tell us what your concerns are. Where do your concerns, because I think that was a great idea, that you really have to watch what mental means, what somebody's mental situation is, and if it began to come from the government to take away arms, and they can come away from anybody. Where's your concern coming
My
from?
concerns basically come from the situation Spain's living now. You have sectors of the population that they're clearly against the government. So if you put that situation here in the States, and you want that people not to be warm or not to have any power of decision, really any power against the government. If I was the government, I would just make them go to the doctor and declare them insane. That way they can't have weapons, they're not a threat for me anymore.
Right. And there's a lot of people who don't believe that you can influence a doctor's decision like that. There's a lot of people who believe that government officials would not do that. Have you seen evidence of people doing that, of government officials doing that?
Well, I haven't seen him, but it seems very easy to get. I mean, I think it's really, really easy. Government really gets in every field of the world if they want to, and they get in economics, they get in your house, they get everywhere. So I don't see why they couldn't get into a doctor's decision, really.
Yeah, and as far as getting into your house and in your economics and stuff like that, that's actually, we're going to get into Patriot Act. We're going to talk about some of those things and how the government has done that. But here in the United States, Crystal, we see government a lot of times just sort of change the rules in midstream. I mean, right now, Obama's put into effect rules about immigration that are absolutely not the law. Executive orders that are contrary to what the actual law is, because he's allowed to enforce it. He makes an order on how we're going to enforce the laws and just does them contrary to the law. So we're sort of fading on our belief that the government officials won't do that. The same way with doctors. You know, we've talked about the problem with projects and people getting drugs. The government will pay doctors for what they distribute to people who are, unable to afford them financially. And these doctors know that. And anybody who's been, I know a lot of people haven't been in these areas that are destitute and with poverty and that kind of stuff, and they think it couldn't happen. But I've been there and I see it. I watch the government dole out prescription medicine that is just for the purpose of being sold to other people and created a black market for drugs on the street. We know that's happening. So we know that this illusion that people aren't going to act outside of it, the only way to do it, I believe, is to control what they can do. What's your take on the way the government has done these things, and what have you seen?
Well, I think President Obama is definitely an advocate of more government, stricter government on every aspect of our lives. But with this bill, he was defeated, and that was like a shameful day for him. He said on Wednesday that he was defeated in this vital background check amendment.
He was actually saying that it was shameful for the people who voted against it. They actually spoke against the Republicans for doing it, but sort of gave the Democrats some of the Democrats that were also against it, sort of gave them a pass and sort of tried to make it bipartisan. But it wasn't just the Republicans voting against that bill. Yeah,
and this proposal said that it would have expanded background checks to gun shows and internet sales while exempting personal transactions. So the vote was 54 to 46, and supporters fell only 6 votes short of the required 60-vote threshold, which is more of a background check, for people trying to get guns. But
well, they only addressed that portion of the bill. Let's talk a little bit more about the bill, because part of it is what they're trying to ban, and it's semi-automatic rifles that can accept a detachable magazine. Fernando learned today what a magazine was. What's a magazine, Fernando?
The magazine is the place where you put all the bullets in it, and then you put it on the gun.
The guns that have where that can be detached, taken out of the gun, and then you fill it up with your bullets or whatever your ammunition is, and then you replace it in your gun. Yeah. So really, I mean, the reason would be that they're trying to limit the number of bullets or ammunition you can put in one magazine. With different measures, 10 or 20, depending on the measure. But what can control that is if you can just take one out and throw another one in, take one out and throw another one in. So they're trying to control that it's detachable, so you can only have that gun can only have whatever that gun holds, and then you got to refill that gun, not a magazine. So they want anything that's detachable magazine and have one military feature. It used to be 2 military features. This includes the pistol grip, the forward grip, a folding type of gun, telescoping, detachable stock, grenade launcher, rocket launcher, barrel shroud, other things that aren't particularly related to, we're talking mostly about guns, rifles, and that type of stuff. Semi-automatic pistols that can accept a detachable magazine and have at least one military feature. That's the threaded barrel, a second pistol grip, those type of things. So really, it doesn't change anything about what the gun can actually do. You know, it's just one feature that makes it look somehow military style. And a lot of people don't realize that that's a portion of this bill. The president would like you to think that all we're doing is saying, hey, if you buy a gun from Academy Sport, you're going to get a background check. If you buy it from a retailer, you're going to get a background check. He'd like to say, we're just claiming, we just want you to have to get a background check if there's a gun show. But that's not really what's in the bill. So as we were talking earlier, you can't always trust that your leaders are going to tell you what you expect to hear, or the truth at any given thing. How do you feel about guns and whether or not they look military style?
Well, I wanted to read this a little bit about this, and the opponents, which include a few Democrats, voiced concern that the proposal is going to infringe on the Second Amendment rights by imposing a burden on those buying and selling guns. And they were claiming that the proposed system would not have prevented the Newtown shootings, you know, would not stop criminals. And then the NRA, I don't know if you've heard about this, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth about what the NRA is doing in association with that, but they said in a statement that this would have criminalized certain private transfers of firearms between honest citizens, requiring lifelong friends, neighbors, to get federal government permission to exercise a fundamental right or face prosecution. So just imposing all these burdens, you know, it's not really going to limit a lot of what goes on.
Right, right. And what they're talking about there with the limits is there's certain guns that are going to be banned under here. And it did kind of exclude some of the guns that were already owned. If they were antique guns, it excluded some of those guns that they were not be a part of. But it also said even if that was excluded, if it was grandfathered in, the transfer of that cell would then become weapon would then become illegal. So if I owned a gun right now and it was grandfathered in and I could legally keep that gun and I wanted to give it to you or sell it to you, I would not be able to. And probably if I were to die and want to leave it to you in a will, I might not be able to. It may be confiscated by the government because that transfer to somebody via will would become illegal. So those are the things we're talking about now. We'll get to the Patriot Act in 30 seconds. There's never been a time when more people were struggling with debt. If you find yourself under pressure with potential foreclosure, repossession of your car, or phone calls from creditors that you just can't pay, then you need to know your rights. I'm attorney James W. Davis. We can assess your situation and help you decide whether a bankruptcy or other debt relief may be your answer. Debt relief consultations are free. Come see us and know your rights.
James W. Davis and Associates, attorneys at law.
I'm attorney James W. Davis, and this is It's the Law Weekend Edition. We're talking about the freedoms we're losing very rapidly in the United States. During the break, we talked about something about the cartridges and the magazines and guns and how we were doing those, and we learned about the New York Reload. Crystal, tell us what we learned.
I don't really know what the New York Reload is. I'm going to have to defer back to you.
Fernando, did you get it?
Yeah, I get pretty much. I think it's, I mean, you can ban a weapon with a, what was the name? Cartridge magazine where you can put a lot of bullets, but you can always have a bag with a lot of guns and just keep pulling one after another.
So apparently the New York Reload is to have a pistol and just fire all the bullets out of that pistol, throw it down, and grab the next one, throw it, and go with that. And that's apparently a New York Reload. That's good information. You know, you can do this without a magazine. Just reload your pistols. Really get plenty of guns loaded.
Don't give them ideas.
It costs a little bit more. Well, apparently they know. Apparently they know. The other thing that was brought up is what does this do to our government when our government puts the guns in the hands of the Mexican cartel and that type of stuff for some perceived purpose to try to monitor where the guns go? Are they now becoming criminal, or we can hold them to the same standard? That's one thing that came up also in break. And Fernando, you were talking about something I think that's even more important, and that's what does the United States do? Who do we sell our guns to?
Yeah.
Who do we sell all of these, not just guns, but heavy, massive weaponry? And often the people we sell it to or give it to aren't our friends.
No, why are they doing that? They're turning around and using it against our soldiers, our U.S. soldiers who are over there. We're arming them, and then letting them go. That seems like a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for
Well,
disaster.
a lot of times, United States want to create conflicts. I mean, the United States and a lot of countries, they want to create conflicts in a third country so they can get some sort of interest that they can. So what they don't realize is that you're giving weapons to this group that at this point is helping you, but they're going to keep those weapons.
You always say things in a nice way and presuming the best of everybody. What they don't realize, to me, is just such an untrue portion of that statement in a very nice way. I believe they absolutely realize what they're doing. I believe they're creating that stuff with an intentional motive, and I don't think that is by accident. I think the people in power are smart enough to know the result of their actions. They might not, the individuals doing it always might not realize what they're doing, but I think as a group they know what they're doing. Also, we want to get to the Patriot Act a little bit before we get out of here. We've talked a little bit longer on those things. So let's talk about the Patriot Act. What do you know about the Patriot Act?
I don't know a lot. I'm sorry, I don't. I mean, I studied more about what was going on recently, and how they're trying to do more support stricter gun control laws. That 49% of Americans support stricter gun control laws, and that was down 58% who said so in January. But that was after the shootings, the December killings of 20 children. That was 20 children that were killed and 6 aides in that Newtown, Connecticut elementary school shooting. And this is, all about the proposals to ban assault weapons and high capacity ammunition. And also, I don't know if you noticed that when President Obama was speaking this week, that Gabrielle Giffords was there, and she was badly injured in that 2011
They actually
shooting.
used a lot of people who have some injuries, but nobody went to the people of the school shootings and said, how many of you parents would have liked somebody in that place to have had a gun? How many of you, how many parents want to come out and say, we would have rathered somebody there have a gun? I'm sure that somebody there, they pick one that wants to stand out against it and act like that they're speaking for the voice. They've picked people who had some sort of injuries because somebody had a gun and misused it. But they're not picking people who did something otherwise. But Fernando, tell us a little about the Patriot Act. I know we're going to run out of time here pretty soon if we don't get to it.
Well, the Patriot Act, as far as I know, it's a really, really big cut of the freedom of the Americans. I mean, it's a sort of a law they make that they give the government the right of getting into your emails, getting into your telephonic conversations, getting into everywhere.
And a large part of what they can do under the Patriot Act, things that used to require a warrant to get into your wiretaps, to get into your email accounts, to get into your bank accounts, to get into those things, and now it requires a letter of national security. So what they're saying now is when the government or when a government department decides that this is a national security interest, that they can do it without any judge, without anybody being responsible other than their letter of use. And we've got the same problem. If you trusted your government, thought your government was always acting in your best interest, then maybe you could say, hey, they're not going to do this except for extreme cases, and this is only about the terrorists. This is only about some Islamic extremist. This would never happen to everyday U.S. citizens. Same thing with the drones we were dealing with not too long ago. Yeah. We would hope they wouldn't be used. But when you give your government the power to do it, people have to realize that people in power misuse the power. I'm not just saying Obama, I'm saying anybody. When you give them that amount of power, they're going to do it for whatever their ideology is. What else did you see in there in the Patriot Act?
Well, another thing that it was really shocking to me is they have created some sort of law that you don't even need a trial or a judge to be judged, actually. You can even be killed by the U.S. government just by the thought that you might be a terrorist. So you don't get to defend yourself, you don't get the presumption of innocence, you don't get nothing. You lost all your rights as long as the government thinks you might be a terrorist, and is the government the only one thinking that you might be a terrorist. So you might be, or you might just be someone against the government, and they consider you a terrorist.
Right, and I made a comment, I was watching some of the old videos before about the ACLU, and we were talking about voter registration. And I made a comment against the ACLU saying that the ACLU would like to go down to Rio Grande and pick up all the people swimming across, take them to the voting booth and give them Disney character names. And if they didn't let them vote, then they would swear it was because of racism. Everything was some reason. But on this issue, the ACLU actually is fighting this, and a lot of more conservative-minded people are also in agreement. It's sort of across the board where there is some agreement here that we believe that rights are being invaded in a way that they shouldn't be invaded. What else? Tell us what else is in there.
Well, another thing that it was shocking too is they give power actually to the banks to investigate you. They're giving power to a bank. If the bank thinks that you might be getting money from a terrorist organization, or that you are using that money with a terrorist purpose or whatever, you're giving power to a bank, which is a private institution, has nothing to do with the government, to investigate you and then get that information to the government or whoever.
And what people, like I said before, people think terrorism is this huge thing and they would actually, but look at the laws and look at the people. Just look up who's been accused of terroristic threats, terroristic acts lately, and it's not terrorist. You know, it's become to the point where an 8-year-old can look at a 40-year-old and say, I'm going to throw this ball in your face and be investigated for terrorism, and I've seen that happen. That's not a made-up example. I've seen it happen. So we know that those things are going on. And one thing that I remember, and I've probably said this before, is I remember when I used to travel, when I was learning Spanish, and I was traveling to different countries with a Hispanic mission group, and we went into Paraguay. And in Paraguay, they opened all of our boxes. They threw all of our stuff out. They started looking through everything that we had. And I remember thinking, because at that point in the United States, we didn't deal with that. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad that I'm from the United States where we don't have to deal with this kind of stuff. And now we've brought all of that looked like a third world country. We've brought all of that on ourselves. And that's where we are now. And we go to the airport and we think we've got this illusion of security, that because they strip us down, they look at us on an x-ray, because we do that. I was an air traffic controller for 11 years. And let me tell you, if somebody wants to get that bomb in that area, they will get it. Going through the normal channels is not the only way to get into those places. And if the American people thinks we're more safe by those things, they're absolutely wrong.
They never look at your carry-on bag. So many people put a carry-on
well,
bag
they
on
normally
the plane.
put the, they normally look at the.
They do look at it, but I also work on aviation. I used to be a flight attendant, and I agree with you. It's really easy to get whatever you want into the airplane. Maybe not by the regular way, but it's really easy to get.
And you believe that the government may be responsible for a lot more than they're letting on, right?
Yeah, that's what I think. I know a lot of people would consider me like a conspiracy theory guy or whatever. But I do think that, I mean, to me it seems very awkward that the government gets a lot of what they really want after some catastrophes like the shooting on schools or whatever.
They get what they want. They use it to get it, or they create it to get it. Just remember, just because somebody's paranoid doesn't mean the government's not out to get you. Our Constitution guarantees us a presumption of innocence. If you've been accused of a crime, do not believe it. When jurors walk in the courtroom, they want to believe that the person in the defendant's chair is guilty. No one wants to believe that a person can be accused of a crime, arrested by the police, jailed, brought to trial by the district attorney, and sat before a judge and jury if they're innocent. I'm attorney James W. Davis. If you've been accused of a crime, you need an attorney who understands that.
James W. Davis and Associates, attorneys at law.
Remember, nothing in this program is designed to be legal advice. If you have a legal concern, you should consult an attorney. You can contact our office, James W. Davis and Associates, at 478-742-1440. Remember to send your legal question to It's the Law at 41NBC.com. And tune in every Wednesday at 6 here on 41NBC, where we'll answer those questions. Also, check out our firm's website at defendmacon.com. I'm attorney Jay Davis. And when it looks like litigation, you need us on your side.